Siblings and sisters and brothers, welcome to Tuesdays for Nurture. This is a webinar series occasionally on Tuesdays, a lot of the time on Tuesdays, turns out, where we talk about faithfully focus on education for the people of God. So we talk about faith-filled politics, interviews of key leaders to how-tos in congregational life, and the impacts of current realities on the life of the church. And all of these webinars will include clear suggestions on what you can do to change the church and the world towards the world God imagines for us. And today I am joined by the staff from the Washington, D.C. office of the United Church of Christ. It's good to see all of you in this collective space together. And I also want to say that it's fitting and powerful to be here with you. As we were discussing earlier, I was talking with team lead Sandy about how, I was activated into this work by the DC office when I was in high school, by a program that, you and your predecessors ran years and years ago. So to work beside you and witness your work and the ways in which that has impact not only in Washington, DC, on our policy and process and everything happening there, but on the life of this denomination and the ways in which you frame language so that we all collectively can be working towards justice together is so meaningful. So extra thanks for that. And we are also excited to start the conversation by asking Sandy, can you intro us into the Washington office and tell us a bit about how our Faith, Our Vote campaign was different and how it played out this year?
I'd be glad to do that, Chris. And I want to first begin by thanking all of you who are listening and watching, who helped to promote and participate in the Our Faith, Our Vote 2020 campaign. What a year and what amazing work. And we're going to talk some more about this. But first and foremost, I want to thank you all for all that you've done. I'm really delighted to be joined by my UCC Washington office colleagues, Jesse Quinn, who's our online communications person, Mike Newroth, who is our international policy advocate person, Katie Adams, who is our domestic policy advocate, and Madison Mayhew, who is our Justice and Peace Fellow. So we are truly a team, and I'm glad to be joined here by them. So it's good to take a moment after this year to just pause, to reflect on what 2020 has brought to us in terms of our faith, our vote, and to look ahead towards the future and to glimpse what we can.
As you're doing that, I'm just mindful that I wish pause is an understatement of the year. All of you have been working tirelessly this year. There's been so many moving pieces, and I know on behalf of all who are present and behalf of the entire United Church of Christ, that gratitude, that awareness, that acknowledgement is one that we are holding and celebrating. So I want to say that outright for all of us. So
thank you, Chris.
Yeah,
thank you.
To our faith, our vote.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Much appreciated. We are your UCC office in Washington, each and every one of us here, and we are helping you to take the prophetic witness of the United Church of Christ, including the witness of our General Synod resolutions, to the places where public policy decision-making is made. Because we know that by impacting policy decisions that we can, that order our common life and help us steward our collective resources, that is how we make God's love and justice real and visible in the world. And so we are partners with you in that effort. And this is a call, as we know, that is rooted deeply in our scripture and our faith tradition, declared by the Hebrew prophets, lived out by Jesus's teachings and ministry. So as the UCC office is really, we really rely on you to work with you, to equip you, to empower you, to amplify the work that you are doing to bring about a more just world for all. And we do this also in partnership with ecumenical and interfaith partners, as well as secular partners in the work. And we work to break the yoke of injustice. So it's a systemic kind of work. The policies and practices that leave millions of people without affordable health care and without affordable housing, or with facing food insecurity, or not being able to attain a livable wage. The systems that perpetuate racism and oppression in our common life. That's part of the work that we do here in the Washington office. And so the UCC Our Faith, Our Vote campaign is part of that work, is one tool of that work, because we know that policies are shaped by the people who are at the policy-making tables. And so elections matter. And so our voice matters in the electoral process. And so back in 2004, the United Church of Christ, Our Faith, Our Vote campaign was born. And it's a nonpartisan, faith-based election engagement campaign that involves voter registration activities, issue education opportunities and activities, and also focuses on voter mobilization and voter empowerment and protecting voting rights. And that's work that that goes on all year, every year. So we'll be continuing to do that next year for sure. So those three pieces, and I don't need to tell you that this year brought unprecedented challenges to that work, with a global health pandemic and highly polarized and divided public square, and a growing economic crisis. And so many of the ways that we had engaged Our Faith, Our Vote in the past had to be really creatively changed. And we worked on doing that from our end, but I also just want to lift up the incredibly creative ways that our congregations did that as well. So going from a campaign that relied very heavily on in-person engagement, doing voter registration tables at coffee hours and at shopping malls, and doing issue education webinar, forums at webinars, forums, like real life forums with real people, at church after coffee hour, and doing get out the vote work and canvassing neighborhoods. We really had to change all of that approach. And so I am really grateful to Jessie, our online communications person, back in January. She had the foresight to realize that we could do voter registration online through our UCC Civic Action Center. That was a huge help for us to be able to reach across that physical divide, and be able to still engage people in voter registration in our congregations and our conferences, giving them the tools to be able to do that. We shifted our issue education resources to online resources and webinars that congregations could use in their worship service or in other ways. And for example, St. Peter's United Church of Christ in Houston, Texas, took many of our issue education webinars, and they had like a whole week-long virtual forum on the issues that matter in the elections. And that was not just federal, but state and local as well. So they were able to do that, and that was really exciting. And then we found ways to do phone banking and ways to reach out. And Heritage United Church of Christ in Baltimore is another congregation that comes to my mind. They had signs and that made sure that people were registered to vote. They went to busy intersections so they could safely social distance and make sure that people were registered to vote and were going to be out, getting out to the polls in one way, shape, or form. And then another real challenge of the work and was just readapting to the fact that we were going to vote in multiple ways this year. And so we were challenged with the task of of helping people to understand what their opportunities were to vote, that whether they wanted to vote in person safely, if they wanted to vote by mail, or vote or drop their ballot off at a drop box. And so this was a whole new piece to us, and was a really important part of the work.
Just a really important part of the work, an extensive portfolio of the work. Jessie, I know that you have been holding so much of the engagement for Our Faith, Our Vote, the communications, the digital, you have imagined so much of this. So I am curious, What have you witnessed? What are some of the stories of that engagement from Our Faith, Our Vote and beyond? And as Jesse is answering that, I also want to say that if you have specific, this is your staff, y'all. As you have questions for the work that they are doing, use the question and answer below what's happening here, and I will repeat those verbatim for those of you watching on YouTube.
Thank you, Chris. And yeah, this was a really exciting time of engagement because, as Sandy mentioned, we had to be really creative and find new ways to engage with our advocates on the Our Faith, Our Vote campaign. Some of the new ways that we engaged that I want to mention with our advocates are well, Sandy already mentioned, but the Civic Action Center that allowed us to help our advocates check their voter registration and find important election information in their location. That we did also engagement through our Vote Tripling campaign with election issue webinars, which we mentioned, and with the Our Faith, Our Vote social media toolkit. I want to break it down a bit by the numbers because I think that's exciting. Over 4,000 of our advocates checked their voter registration on our Civic Action Center. Over 1,400 people signed on to the Vote Tripling campaign. This equals the equivalent of 5,780 committed voters. Close to 1,000 people watched and engaged with our issue webinars on topics from environmental justice to healthcare to voting rights to gender justice and more. Over 1,000 of our advocates signed on to a letter defending and supporting the democratic process, sent over 800 messages to legislators on the importance of protecting the United States Postal Service, and our advocates emailed and tweeted legislators over 2,000 messages about the need for election funding and advocating for safe and fair elections. So props to everybody that participated. That was amazing. I'd also like to add on a personal note, my favorite part to witness around the engagement of our advocates was the sharing and support of our resources on social media. Congregations and individual members alike were so engaged with the campaign on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, using our hashtags like hashtag Our Faith, Our Vote, hashtag UCC Votes, hashtag UCC Votamost. And it was encouraging and energizing to see how many folks shared this information with their own networks, and it really helped give this campaign the support it needed to be successful.
We know that this campaign actually doesn't exist in a vacuum and that there are so many people. We are coalition partners alongside in Washington, D.C. and beyond. So I want to name that out loud. And I know, Katie, you've been holding a lot of that. So invite you to speak into some of those coalitions before we move on a little bit.
Yeah, well, we're lucky enough to be a part of, right, like you said, faith and secular partners. So there's the Faithful Democracy Working Group, which Sandy also is a really a strong contributor to. And then there's, especially around election protection and issues around potential contested election, or just making sure that our, the election that just happened and then the ongoing process is protected. So we've been part of Count the Vote and Protect the Results. And it's been really great to partner with secular partners who realize the importance of faith communities. And, right from the get-go, we've been able to be in there and say that, our trusted faith voice and our faithful advocates are needed as part of the conversation, both in de-escalation of conflict, but also the, kind of idea of a trusted voice in these very unsettled times. And so, we work in partnership, and that's been, to be able to share with our secular partners the importance of the faith voice has been really important right now.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that thread a little bit because there continues to be this trepidation of what is going on,
Yeah,
what will happen, and how do we do this with integrity, intention, and faith. So with that awareness and with the earnestness of holding space for all who are children of God, what do you see for the transition process over the next several weeks?
it's unlike one we've encountered for a really long time in the United States. And And I think one thing that we're really fortunate and we've really shored up the election officials in all of our counties and states who are faithfully counting votes and making sure that those votes are, tallied. And it's an arduous process, especially during a pandemic. And so the transition process is a little different, as we've been, telling everyone. It took a while to count the votes, and now that we have a total, it's time, for the decision of the voters to stand. And so we have until December 14th before the Electoral College officially votes on who's president. And I think that one thing I'm looking forward to is participating in ongoing work and how we can make sure that democracy is protected and elections are more free and fair. And so the Electoral College is something that it deserves a second look. But the world we're in now, we have the Electoral College. They're meeting on December 14th. And at that point, that's, I know, an area that we're all really looking toward. Once certification happens, then they'll send those votes to the House of Representatives, and Congress will certify that vote. And that'll happen in early January. So there's a few inflection points between now and then. Right now, I think we really uplift the fact that voters have spoken and they've chosen the leadership that they want in charge. And, we need to make sure that we have a smooth transition. And that includes, again, faith voices saying we need to make sure that, the new administration has access to the resources they need to prepare to take on the mantle of power. And so we're looking at how do we ease that transition, freeing up money from the Government Services Administration, things like that. So I think right now, really just supporting the fact that voters have chosen and going from there.
And with every ripple of the unraveling and the reforming and the reimagining, there's challenge and opportunity. And I know that each one of you, on behalf of the United Church of Christ, is consistently, carefully studying those things to see what and how do we align and engage. So what is it that you're witnessing? What are the challenges and opportunities that are present and that will be present for the Biden administration? So I will start somewhere between Madison and Mike. If you're ready for it, hop in.
Sure. I think that's such a great question. And as we know, we've seen the current administration roll back significant environmental protections. And as a church dedicated to environmental justice, this is a huge area that we can continue to be involved in. It's not just the environmental protections that the EPA regulates, but it's also the Paris Climate Agreement that the Trump administration has officially stepped back from. Biden has dedicated from day one to recommitting to that. So it's very exciting. There are several other ways that we can be involved. Biden released one of the most ambitious presidential environmental plans that we've seen in years. And so there's a lot of momentum moving forward. And so there will be a lot of energy that we can build on to really engage in the climate space. And I'm personally really excited because he's really demonstrated an ability to build a coalition with a wide variety of different voices to make sure that there's an audience from all different perspectives. So I hope that all of you are equally excited to be engaged in that portfolio as well.
And I would add from the international perspective, as Katie mentioned, much of our work is done here in coalitions and working groups. And so a lot of our work right now really is trying to map out what this next administration is going to look like, who are taking over key posts, We are working on and contributing to signing on to transition memos right now to a transition team on priorities that we have as the faith community. We're also continuing to mobilize. As many of you know, I've looking at the chat box, I recognize many of your names. Some of you have come through DC to do direct advocacy or have participated in ecumenical advocacy days. So we actually are still doing a virtual EAD this spring in April. So be on the lookout for those materials. But on specific
Wait.
Go ahead.
EAD, you said EAD.
Oh, sorry, ecumenical advocacy days.
Excellent. You also said that, but it didn't register for me. And I know that others are probably in the same acronym land.
Exactly. But on particular policies, there's a lot that we can be hopeful about with this incoming administration, as well as, I think, expect somewhat of a status quo in other areas on the international and particularly in the peace and security realm. We expect, as Madison said, for the U.S. to come back into the Paris Climate Agreement. We expect probably that the Biden administration may extend the New START treaty. It's a nuclear treaty with Russia, as well as a treaty agreement with Iran on nuclear weapons. So those are some positive things. We expect probably the ending of dismantling of our diplomatic corps, which has happened over the past 4 years, as well as a reinvestment in peace building and conflict resolution as a strategy that the U.S. has pivoted away from over the past 4 years. On other particular issues, I think we can expect a reset or rebalancing of American-Israeli-Palestinian relations. I expect the Biden administration to undo some of Trump's policies that undermined U.S.-Palestinian relations and moving us again back toward the trajectory of a two-state solution. Yet, on the status quo side, we expect it probably to be an overall pro-Israeli approach to his foreign policy. We'll also continue to see continued Asia pivot that the Obama administration had and continuing kind of Cold War tactics to some degree to address rising power of China and unpredictable North Korea, increasingly adversarial Russia. So what we don't expect, unfortunately, is kind of a peace dividend to come out of this new administration of a rollback of militarism or Pentagon spending, unfortunately. We may see something like a return to a first use only doctrine on nuclear weapons and possibly a cut for certain maybe intercontinental ballistic missiles, but certainly I think we expect continued upgrading of our nuclear capabilities and in general kind of a status quo in some areas. So there'll be some good and as well as maybe some areas where we'd like to see this administration go further, and that is our call as advocates to try and push them in that direction these next 4 years.
And I think I could just piggyback a little bit on Mike. We've actually been starting to do that work as part of the Washington Interreligious Faith Community, which is this amazing interfaith coalition of groups here in Washington of more than 70 organizations. And back beginning in March and April, when the COVID-19 pandemic was really beginning to hit, and we were really seeing, not for the first time, of course, because we've seen this before, but for many people, it was an eye-opener in terms of the disparities in our society in terms of economic resources, healthcare resources, the divisions that racism has created to keep people from getting access to resources they need. So it wasn't, the first time that the veil was lifted back, but it was a powerful time. And one of the things that we began talking about it right at that time in the faith community was, normal wasn't working for most people to begin with. So we don't want to go back to normal. We want to be faithful. And so we've been working on a document, and Mike and Katie and Madison have all been part of this work to envision what would public policy look like moving forward? What would our policies look like if we actually took on the challenge seriously of engaging what COVID-19 has made real to us, which are the glaring structural disparities in our country that have literally cost millions of lives. And so we're working on that policy piece, and Katie can say, Mike's talked a little bit about the international angles, and Katie can maybe say a little bit more about the domestic angles. But I think that I just want to lift up that work that has been happening. And I noticed in the chat box, somebody was asking about how we compete with the moneyed powers and the lobbyists and those voices. This is really one of those ways, and we're a unique voice in the public sphere. Our special interest is the common good, and that makes us unique, and it gives us a certain kind of moral credibility that other groups don't have, and so we take that very seriously to find ways to convey that.
I know, Katie, do you want to add anything more? I know you're doing a lot of that in what is perceived competition with those who have money and access to the folks in power. So I want to open that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like Sandy said, our faith voice lends something very special and rare and very welcome to the conversation. So, you know, we work with faith groups from all varieties, and so it's not, you know, the UCC in conjunction with faith communities goes in and we say, look at this huge swath of the country that we represent. You know, members in Congress care about their election prospects and being reelected, and that means they have to listen to their constituents. And so, you know, we were able to go in and say, your constituents are part of our communities. And so I think that plays an important role. Yeah.
So much of the guiding force that I know all of you are in conversation with about how you use your energy is the General Synod resolutions and how those have directed us as the church at large to speak from where we believe and why. And that continues to inform the work that is happening. I want to lift up another question that came in about there is possibility for so much damage between now and even December 14th. So how can we, Jesse, I'm going to invite you to speak into this. How can we be part of that truth telling and helping to calm the fear and hatred that seems to be continuing to grow?
Yeah, thank you. I really liked this question because I feel like part of the answer is actually in the question. This individual mentioned like truth telling. Like, I think that's a big component of it, is that we want to lead with the truth and making sure that we're, you know, being critical about the information that we're spreading, what we're lifting up. I also think we have a role in our messaging in congregations as the church, to lead with our values as the UCC. And we want to think about kind of weaving the moral language that we have to use into our messaging around this topic. And I also think it's important to lead with what we stand for, not what we're against. So let's focus on what we want. Let's focus on what our faith shows us we should, you know, have for a just world. And then lastly, I would say just be confident in the messaging. There's a lot of anxiety right now. And one of the things we can do is just project that confidence, like, this is the way that it's going to be, and we're going to help it be this way. And I think that can go a long way to helping with some alleviating some of the anxiety and fear. So I think it goes around messaging with leading with our values and what we're for, and then also just being confident about it, like get behind it once you're saying it.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that, and Jesse, I think you would agree with me, you know, staying rooted in story, staying rooted in our stories and the stories of others, being committed to listening to those stories, and particularly being committed to listening to the stories of the people who are most impacted by policies. and by our structural discrepancies. That's where we really need to tune our ear.
Yeah, that's true too.
A few webinars back, Ruby Sales was in conversation, and what she is often known to say is, where is the pain? Where does it hurt? And then we organize around that. So I want to lift her wisdom into this space as well.
Well, and I think that our role as faithful advocates is to put that right in front of legislators and members of Congress so they can't ignore it. It's easy to do that if you're, in Congress sometimes. And our role is to say, no, this is the pain in communities, and this is where there's hardship. And you said, when you took on the mantle of, representing, your state or your county or your district, that you wanted to work for the greater good and you wanted to, represent constituents. And so our role as advocates is to say, this is what's happening in our communities, our faith communities, and this is what you need to do, and to make it impossible for them to look away. And I know that it's hard, to feel like you're breaking through. In my prior role, I worked in Congress, and it's those voices that you remember as you go on to work on legislation or to have conversations with other staffers. And so sharing those stories and combining it with the policy knowledge that we have is really valuable, and I think such a unique place to be. And it really gives us, as the United Church of Christ, and also, working with our other faith partners, a really valuable and needed kind of role on Capitol Hill and within the advocacy space.
A lot of the questions that are coming in, I want to say at the front end, we're not going to be able to get to every single question that's coming in, but I'm going to synthesize into a theme of, this extraordinary continued political divide, this exceptionalism of, and this for those of you who have been in conversation with us across multiple programs, know that this is something we talk about fairly often. The exceptionalism, the winners and the losers, the us and the them, all of these ways in which we are divided from each other. And how do we reach in, tell truth, bring relationship in such a way that we are all in God's love and in intention towards our call as Christians towards aligning alongside those who are most and multiply oppressed in this work. So I want to speak that as a question to many of these. How does our justice work continue to bridge those cultural divides, rural, urban, suburban, all of those things, as well as the multiple issues that have been unnecessary. That's judgmental. Let me reframe. The multiple issues that have been politicized at the expense of our own health. Read COVID-19.
One thing I would say, Chris, is that, when you talked about Ruby Sales and talking about naming where the pain is, and Walter Brueggemann does the same thing. You have to name the pain rightly before it can be healed. And I think the faith community, I'll just take as an example, our partner network, a Catholic Social Justice Lobby, did a whole series of rural forums last year to talk about the challenges that we're facing rural communities. And so, some of these divides, if we actually came together to talk about where things were really hurting for us, we might find that things are hurting in some of the same places. And some of the same things need to happen. And as a faith community, as people who are committed to staying engaged in community, and that doesn't mean staying in agreement, it means staying engaged in community. That's a very powerful thing. And there's not a lot of other groups out there that hold the space for that to happen. And I think that we have the spiritual resources we need if we dig deep to be able to hold that conversation space.
So go ahead, Mike.
I just want to add one thing. I think that's so critical to understand the type of work that we do. We are really occupy a unique space here in Washington in that we really do have one foot in the church and try as much as we can to bring those stories that are of people being experienced in our local churches that we hear through direct engagement, through our local churches, through our conference structure, as well as in my case through global partners, the stories that we get through our global ministries, and be able to share that here on Capitol Hill. So often folks are, a lot of our, the lobbyists that are here on the Hill, they're just in the beltway. They're bringing just a perspective of kind of spins on policies and thoughts, but really are not rooted in the lived experience of partners and of our churches. And so that is, again, what is so important for us to bring, as Katie said, it's the stories that matter. And so whenever, we welcome your stories, we welcome you to come through DC, we welcome you to share experiences you're having in your local communities or in partnership with partners abroad as well, to help inform our work.
So I want to lift in another question that's relevant to what you're saying in the midst of everything, Mike. That being, so much has changed over the course of 2020. Our own stories have changed in ways that will never be the same. Our collective stories have changed in ways that have never been the same. So how have the realities on the ground changed our UCC justice work strategies?
Well, there's a way in which they remain the same because they're rooted in who we are as people of faith. They're rooted in our faith tradition. We're called to speak truth to power. We're called to ask how the most marginalized are being treated by policy decisions. That remains the same. That's all true. Now, we certainly have different ways of communicating, the whole media landscape has changed. Many of these, and the fact that we have lost public space to gather in, public libraries, public schools, public transportation, all these places where we used to invest in places where people of different backgrounds could come together. The church is one of the few places that could still happen. And so, in some levels, while our the strategy, the actual on the ground strategy might change somewhat, it's still really informed by that justice vision, and I think it's really important to hold fast to that.
I'm mindful that, in so many spaces, even using the word justice itself is politicized. So I would be remiss if I did not let this webinar, this program go by without also saying, Jesus is political. If we are saying the things that are written in the gospel, if we are preaching the message of the gospel, we are inherently involved in the politics of today. Mm-hmm. So when folks say, keep the politics out of the pulpit, how do you respond to that? How do you respond to that?
So I really try to help people make a distinction between political and partisan. If you think about political as being the ways that we shape our common life, if you look in the Hebrew scriptures, and it goes into great detail to talk about how should weights and measures be used in the marketplace, how should the widow and the orphan be treated in communities, very, very specific about how common life should be ordered. And really that's political. Political is our common life. And that's different from partisanship, which is adherence to a particular party or ideology. And again, I think this is what makes us really powerful in the work that we're doing in advocacy community as faith-based advocates, is that again, as I said before, our special interest is the common good. And we are not allied with anyone. We will speak truth to whoever's in power. We will continue to do that in the next coming months and years with a new administration where their vision differs from ours in terms of what our General Synod resolutions have lifted up and what our faith tradition teaches us. We will speak truth to that power. So I think making that distinction between political and partisan is really important.
I love that. It's going to be all of our work to pull together resources for how we connect in this growing divide. And I want to say that because there's a question that came in specific to what resources do we have, and I know that there are some forthcoming, and that there are also some that are present within the ways in which we already know how to be church. What behavioral covenants do you have? How are you deciding how you will treat each other internal to the structures? How are you in relationship with the folks outside of the institution of your church, advocating for what is happening in the ground in your town and beyond? So I want to speak to that too, while also saying that is all of our work. The DC office has a gateway into a particular arm of it, and collectively we are going to continue to be in that conversation as the church, because we are the church. No matter who you are or where you are in life's journey, you are welcome here. Or as some others might say, all people are welcome, all behaviors are not. And how are we going to define that in such a way that we can create a space that enables each one of us to be the fullest version of who we are called to be by God? In that vein, I'm going to pose a question that is really for all of you. And Sandy, to you first. But in the midst of that, we're going to do this question by invitation. So Sandy, you can speak and then invite somebody who has not yet answered to go next. In the midst of all of this, and then more, where do you hold the hope?
I've been asking myself that a lot lately during the whole year. I've been working for the Washington office for 30 years now. This is my 30th year, and have seen so many changes over that time. I've never before encountered some of the challenges that we're facing, but I'm heartened by the incredible power, people power. Honestly, I'm just heartened by people power. When I look at some of the things that our UCC congregations did to help participate in our Faith Our Vote, we had a St. Paul's community in Cleveland did special outreach to formerly incarcerated people. People did partnerships with the NAACP in their communities and did safe canvassing. Regular people doing extraordinary things. And that's what I have my hope. I put my hope in that. I think it's just tremendously inspiring and heartening, and to remember that we're not in this alone. There's so many of us out there. We may not always know that, but just the little and small ways that I heard of people doing the little bit of part that they could. For some people who were retired and it wasn't safe for them to go out, that they chose to do phone banking. But everyone kind of found a way and a way to do their part. And certainly that's not to say that we don't have a tremendous amount of work to do, But at the end of the day, God is God, and I rest in that assurance. I'm going to kick it off to Katie.
Yeah, unmute myself. All of the amazing ways that so many people engaged. It is really special to see. And I think that that's where a lot of our hope lives, is with one another. I think that, and I've said this before in A Witness for Justice, so I'm plagiarizing myself. But I think that there's this idea of community and church as community, whether or not we're virtual, that sometimes you don't have any hope. And so it's hard sometimes to find it. And fortunately, that's what community is there are other people right then who can hold that hope for you. And so then that helps you find it again. And so, we kind of go in and out of that space. And I think that's a lot of where I find the hope, is turning over and over again to community and to church, and to seeing, the myriad ways that people are lifting one another up. And so, I'm just going to go down, at least on my screen, to Mike.
Thank you, colleague Katie. What is giving me hope is, in part, I do feel like we've gone through a really dark time. And I feel like, and I'm not just talking COVID, I'm talking about the past 4 years. And I think back to, the Women's March right after President Trump was inaugurated, and then you have this past summer, you've got, the many different, marches and movements that have emerged over these past 4 years around the movement for Black Lives. And I think we're just in a much different place as a nation, and certainly as progressive advocates. And I'm seeing closer connections being made between the type of work that we do here on the Hill in policy advocacy that's trying to address the structural justice issues and shifting policy, with the movements in the streets, for which those are our evidence, our political power emerges from, is from our church and from the movements out there, because members of Congress know that they can't ignore our voices if they're backed up by millions of people in the streets that share our perspective on these issues. So that's given me such hope. The creativity, the energy of these movements, in spite of what have been some of the darkest years of any of our lives. Forward together. And Ms. Madison.
Thank you. I think, it's hard to find something unique after all of those beautiful sentiments. But just building off what was said, I think in a lot of similar ways, what gives me a lot of hope is thinking about the really amazing movements that have happened over the past 4 years, and thinking about how some ideas that were once considered way too radical are now considered mainstream, and ideas that are really just a simple idea of taking care of one another. And I'm really encouraged by the narrative around intersectionality and how we can create policy that impacts, that just better takes care of our humanity and our earth. And so I'm really excited about how we can continue to move forward. As Mike said, we lived through a really dark time. I was thinking about how so many times in our office, we would just feel like we were just treading water because it felt like we didn't know how to keep moving. And this past week, I kind of feel like it can breathe just a little bit lighter. And that alone, in some ways, gives me some hope that it's a little bit of a fuel to keep going. A reminder that there is, we can breathe, let's dream a little bit bigger, let's fight for something a little bit stronger. So there's definitely good happening on the ground, and that's what keeps me hopeful. And I'll pass it lastly to Jessie.
Yeah, no, I'll go last after all that. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I think my hope is without sounding too much like I'm echoing what my lovely team has said, but my hope comes from community, and that being the community from our advocates, the interactions that I get to have with them online, through our social media, through our Justice and Peace Action Network, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and through the community that we experience masked and social distancing at the protests that we've been participating at. And most importantly, the community that I feel with my team here in DC. Sandy recently included a piece in one of her writings about like thinking of it as like a flock of geese flying, and that like the lead goose takes some of the weight from and helps the others kind of, and then when they get tired, they move to the back of the V, and then someone else takes over. And sometimes this team kind of feels like that, where we kind of shoulder things a little bit for each other. And sometimes I don't feel hopeful. And we all share moments like that and can look to each other. So I think that all just speaks to finding hope in community right now, in virtually and in person safely, the ways that we can do that.
Just one quick thing I would want to add to the wonderful words of my colleagues is I turn a lot to the writings of Rebecca Solnit, who is an amazing activist and wrote a book of essays called Hope in the Dark. And she always talks about history is not linear. Pushback will happen. And And sometimes history is like a crab that's scuttling sideways and getting around objects. And I just think sometimes it's so important to know that we can't always measure things linearly. And that, especially in times like these, when there really is pushback and it feels like one step forward, two steps back.
It's so funny you said that, Sandy. I was going to add in a nice linear definition. So here it is. I am mindful of C.R. Snyder's definition of hope that has 3 pillars of this is how you make hope. And the first is about having the goal, having the vision. And this is what we do as faith people. We imagine that there is a world better than this one. And then the second part of it is that there are pathways to get there. You know, we work together to get there. You help set the vision, and all of you who are witnessing this conversation on YouTube or here in Zoom, like, you are part of the pathway to get there. You give hope. And then the third is that we believe in our own ability to act. We believe that we can, and that the whole of this is something that we collectively are working towards. It's a process. We can choose to do it, and it's nonlinear too. Sometimes some of those things fall short or ebb and flow, as one who is wise has named often, Katie Adams. And together we imagine that we are partners alongside God in creating a world God says is possible. And to me, that's something that I cling to every single day, is that we are in this together. It's not only on me, it's not only on you, but it's up to all of us to create the world for our great, 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 great granddaughters to know a reality different than this one. All of ours, all of them, all of them. So we're going all the way.
I was going to say, I find hope in freshly baked chocolate chip cookies too. So, you know.
Thanks be to God, amen. So from there, you know, you have done such incredible things with such limited resource. You have done such intention on behalf of the whole of the United Church of Christ. Thank you. And how do we stay connected? How do we keep going from here? How do we make sure that we know what you are doing and what you need us to do in conversation with you?
Yes, thank you, Chris. I'm going to jump in here. So like we're saying, all of this work that we do is possible because of the support from all our amazing advocates. And I hope that anybody watching this who is not already a member of our Justice and Peace Action Network, that they get signed up today. This is the list that we send weekly action alerts every Thursday. They're targeted to specifically address issues or legislation that's pertinent at the time. So we have an editorial board and we discuss what is going to be the most impactful messaging for that week. And we send you this email that with one click allows you to directly email and tweet at your respective legislators with messages that we even help draft for you. So that is one way that we would love for everyone to get engaged. Maybe you're not a big fan of email. That's okay. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Justice and Witness Ministries, where you can get more frequent updates on our work here in DC, sometimes cute pics of the team, as well as ways to take action every day. So there's a lot of different things. We also share things from our ecumenical partners, from people in the WISC community, the Washington Interreligious Staff community. So lots of resources there. And if you're interested specifically in democracy and election related engagement in particular, the best place to start is at our website, which is www.ourfaithourvote.org. I think all these resources are going to be included, sent to you. So, and on that website, you can find many of the different resources that we mentioned earlier in this webinar, and we add new information there when we have it related to elections. So that is a good place to start if you're specifically wanting to focus on that.
And if you're watching us on YouTube, you're going to find it below the screen in all of the definitions of what we've got going on.
Awesome.
And part of that too, Chris, I would just say that there's something for everyone. We're, like Jesse said, if you're not into emails, you know, we also need people to write letters to the editor. We need to, and editors of your very local hometown paper, or to write, or to engage in op-eds, or to go on talk shows, or, you know, there's so many ways that we can influence the conversation. And all of those tools are part of I can be found on the ucc.org/justice website.
Yes.
And I'll just add, I put in the dates for the Ecumenical Advocacy Days in the chat, but come join us.
And if you're watching on YouTube, they are.
They are. The dates are April 18 through 21. Check it out at www.advocacydays.org. This is the largest lobby day event that we help organize here with the faith community in DC. But it's a great way to get trained on how to do advocacy, as well as issues and a variety of topics that we've talked about here.
Y'all, I cannot express how much it means to me to know that you are attentive to the issues in such a critical way. And if you're watching this and this has meant something to you, to know that these folk are working on your behalf and we are in communication with you all throughout, please consider donating into the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. And that supports all of our work. That supports the work of these programs. It supports the work of these people. So please consider donating into our collective work. Additionally, I want to let you know about some things that are upcoming that are really exciting. Number one, on Thursday, we are going to be joined by critically acclaimed Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter Jennifer Knapp, who will be doing a concert with us and holding some church via Zoom and music. So join us on Thursday for that. And on Tuesday, we're going to hear from some of our new church starts and innovative new church ministries directly. So you can, a week from today, if you want to see some of that in action and witness and listen to the stories of those who are really innovating into what is this existence, join us on Tuesday. And on Thursday next, y'all, I recommend that you do some research upon which land you sit, whose land it is, research who's doing that kind of native organizing in your community and donate into them in the midst of what will be a celebration of family and food and beyond, for whatever that means for you. But we will not be here. So having said that, and with such a deep, abiding joy for our collective work together, Sandy, can I invite you to pray us out into the rest of our day?
I would be glad to, Chris. Creator God, in whom we live and move and have our being, we call you by many names, but we come to you in one spirit. We are grateful for your accompaniment and the journey of justice and peace as your people, as your pilgrim people. And we ask that you continue to be with us, to be the pillar of fire before us, to hold us fast to that vision. And when we falter, to help us strengthen each other and equip each other to stand again and move forward. Gracious God, you have given us all the gifts we need for the day. And for that, we are grateful. And help us to remember that. Help us to remember that you have given the gifts that we need. Help us to lean into that promise and to trust in that and to move forward with you toward a more just world for all. Amen.